Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
As you may know, during the Trump inauguration, over 200 of our comrades were arrested, and all of them really need our support around their legal funds. It costs a lot of money to help defend these people, so we are releasing a t-shirt with the amazing action against Richard Spencer, the fucking neo-Nazi, getting punched in the face with the slogan, "Make racist afraid again," because we as a community need to band together and refuse to normalize this bullshit behavior. So go get your shirt, let everyone know that you won't normalize this bullshit behavior, and help support our comrades that desperately need those funds.
We're only doing these shirts for a limited run, and when the fundraiser is over, we won't have them anymore. So get them now. Support our comrades. WhичSideCollective.org.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you
on? This is episode 219.
Yeah, we talk with Robert Grillo, author of Farm to Fable. But first, here's our side. Let's step into our time machine. I'm sure we have time machine sound effects
Going on right now.
Yeah, going on right now. So we're in our time machine. We're going all the way back to 1901. Because we are going to Cleveland, Ohio, where Emma Goldman is doing a speech. You know, she actually had a box that she would stand on. Like, people talk about soap boxes. Mm-hmm. She would stand on this box so her head was just above the crowd, and then she would give these booming speeches. So she's in Cleveland, Ohio doing this. While she's doing that, a gentleman forces his way up to where she's giving her speech and basically says, "Hey, I'm all about this shit, but we need to be way more fucking violent."
Security culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge fucking red flag, right? A week later, this exact letter was distributed through a newspaper called The Free Society, an anarchist newspaper of the time. Mm-hmm. Attention! The attention of the comrades is called to another spy. He is well dressed, of medium height, rather narrow shoulders, blonde, about 25 years of age. Up to the present, he has made his appearances in Chicago and Cleveland. In the former place, he remained but a short time, while in Cleveland he disappeared when the comrades had confirmed themselves of his identity, and were on the point of exposing him. His demeanor is of the usual sort, pretending to be greatly interested in the cause, asking for names or soliciting aid for acts of contemplated violence. If this same individual makes his appearance elsewhere, the comrades are warned in advance and can act accordingly. Right? Like that's the perfect example of calling out bad behavior. But, as history will later tell, he was somebody who classified himself as an anarchist, and he actually assassinated the President of the United States, Henry McKinley. This gentleman, whose name I am going to horribly mispronounce because I do not speak a lick of Polish, was Leon Kozolgish.
Sure.
Yeah, most publications just refer to him as a Polish anarchist. What's really interesting about this act, most of the anarchists of the time really kind of distanced themselves from Leon. Emma Goldman did write a letter of support, but from what I could tell, she was the only one. He actually pled guilty. It's the only thing he said, and the judge refused to take his guilty plea. Said, really? No, you're going to go through trial, right? So he got court-appointed attorneys. They tried to prove that he was, quote-unquote, insane, at the time, because their whole defense was only an insane man would go murder the president where you would get caught. Mm-hmm. He gets found guilty. The jury only deliberated for 30 minutes. Then they electrocuted him. The only thing he said right before he was electrocuted was, "I did it, and I don't regret it." There's two major events that are directly linked to this assassination that we are still living with today. The first one is the 1903 Immigration Act, otherwise known as the Anarchist Expulsion Act. The Congress came out specifically and stated any immigrant that was coming to the United States or someone who wasn't already a United States citizen could be deported for being an anarchist, for having epilepsy, for being a beggar or for being a prostitute.
Now, that doesn't make sense, the epilepsy part. I mean, I can kind of grasp anarchism, beggars, and prostitutes, but what the fuck, epilepsy?
I mean, what the fuck, all of it, right?
Yeah.
But so that's one of the things that I find very interesting of an unintended consequence of that assassination. That immigration bill, I mean, it affected thousands of people. It actually got taken all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said, no, we can actually, deport you for being an anarchist. It's what Alexander Berkman and Emma Goldman were deported under. I think a total of 4,000 people actually faced deportation because of this act. The other big thing was it was one of the key incidences that caused the formation of the FBI.
Wow.
Yeah. This instance really makes me reflect back on two major things, right? The importance of security culture. We have to be aware and keep each other safe. I love they weren't afraid to do that. But then I look at like all of the other things that affected all these other people because of this one act. And it makes me really think about the actual consequences of our actions.
But we can't really blame him for...
Oh, fuck no. No. I'm not casting blame. I'm not even trying to analyze the action. I'm not even calling the action good or bad. Just, it's an interesting look at what can happen.
Definitely.
And it's a good reminder that, as we fight the state powers, that they will put their full force on us. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't fucking fight. That's not at all what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Just, we always got to keep that in mind.
Definitely.
This is the spot in the show where we're going to beg you for some money. It's an ad. Let's get through it together. We would really appreciate it if you head on over to whichsidecollective.org and help support the show. And in return, we'll send you some sweet shit. And you get to pick that shit that we send you. It's kind of how it works. You can pick a patch. You can pick t-shirts, hoodies, totes. We have lots of stuff. We have zines. So head on over to whichsidecollective.org. Give us your money. We'll give you some shit. And we'll all be happy.
While you're checking things out, be sure to check us out on social media. Just go to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the social tab, and you can find all the social media accounts that we have.
And if you're looking for a super simple way to help out the show, just go rate and review us on your favorite podcast aggregator. iTunes is the most popular. It helps us out the most. It just makes it easier for people to find the show. So if you have a second, go rate and review us.
Give us that 5 stars. Want to hear your voice saying fuck shit damn at the end of an episode? Just dial 424-ANARCHY and leave a message. That's 424-262-7249.
So why on God's earth would you sit down and be like, I want to sit down and write a book? Because every author I've talked to said it is one of the most challenging things they've ever done.
Yeah, and I would say that it is definitely one of the most disciplined things I think I've ever had to do, because prior to that, like for years prior to that, I was writing for the Free From Harm website and, writing short posts on social media and, kind of doing some activism that way. So it was kind of like focusing on like one particular example of a fiction that I would see in my everyday life and take a photo of it and then write a post about it or post on Facebook or something. So it was kind of taking lots of different examples and then, not realizing though that I was kind of building towards something broader. And so what it kind of, the way this kind of evolved was at first I came up with a presentation, the Farm to Fable presentation, and it was kind of exploring these fictions of animal consumption. And then after about 4 years of doing the presentation, a publisher saw it and came to me and asked me if I was interested in writing a book about it. And I had been thinking about it, but it's just like you said, it's one of those daunting things that, like, if you haven't written a book before, the prospect of writing a book is just, incredibly intimidating. But then, I thought about it for a while and I thought, I really have a lot of material. And it's just a matter of how do I put this material together and organize it and bring it to a level where, somebody could look at it as a collection and really make sense out of it. So that was a huge task, that part of the book writing. Excuse me.
No worries. So, like, you developed the presentation, right? That you were giving all around.
Mm-hmm.
How did you take from the presentation into the book? Like, what is the actual process of going through that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's something I struggled with. I felt like the presentation provided a kind of a structure for the book, and so the presentation and the book are both kind of structured in a similar way. And the first part is really kind of providing people with a framework for why we believe what we believe, and looking more closely at how propaganda functions in our culture, and how corporate interests largely influence that, and so that people have a better framework of how propaganda is used to control the public mind. And so I look kind of historically. I look at the era of fascism and the era just before that in the United States of the birth of public relations and the birth of marketing. And actually, they're very closely connected. There's a there's a figure in the U.S. Named Edward L. Bernays who was the author of a book in 1928 called Propaganda. And this actually was hugely influential. And he was using the term propaganda pretty unabashedly. But then an interesting thing happened years later, and it was that Goebbels and the fascists started to really praise this book and use it as kind of like a manifesto to how to run a ministry of propaganda in Nazi Germany. And when Bernays kind of caught wind of this, he quickly changed that reference to propaganda and started using the term public relations. And that's really how public relations and marketing was born in this country. So I try to provide that context because I think it's so important for people to understand what's happening is really pretty far from benign. And we really have to understand how sophisticated and powerful those mechanisms of propaganda are in our culture. And then the second part goes into the second major part of the book is really about looking at the different kinds of fictions, starting with a group of what I call foundational fictions, and then kind of moving to lots of different kinds. And then I try to leave the reader, the more advanced reader, with some thoughts and insights about how we can take this information, how we can use this information and having a better understanding of the fictions of animal consumption. What does that mean for activists, and how can we put that to use? So those are kind of like the three main sections.
So what's fantastic is now I can wholeheartedly and honestly say I can blame Nazis for all marketing.
You can pretty much make a direct, yes, you can make that direct link. It's really interesting. It's this connection, and it was Chris Hedges who actually made me aware of it in a presentation that he gave that I listened to on YouTube, that I watched on YouTube, and it was really him who brought my attention to Bernays and this connection with other forms of mind control, public control, control of the public mind, rather. And so I found that fascinating, and I started doing my own research on it. And sure enough, there's just a lot there.
Without going into it too much, can you give some examples of that propaganda?
Yeah. So the fictions are expressions of the propaganda of the animal exploitation industries. So I start with some of the more foundational ones. So, for example, consent is a fiction that has ancient roots. I think we could go as far back as when we started domesticating and really exploiting animals as pieces of property, as currency, as resources. And you would find this consent narrative popping up in literature. And, it's really just the idea that animals are willing participants in whatever it is that we'd like to do with them. So, we can find examples of ancient examples of, like, in the Hindu tradition, you have the sacred cow, and you have this kind of iconic portrayal of Krishna, Lord Krishna milking the sacred cow. And it's a very benevolent scene, very pastoral. And the cow is very, very much willing to give her milk and to Krishna, and her calves are just lazily sitting around looking very, very fulfilled and content. And so this is the side of reality that we have always portrayed in order to subvert any real harm that we know is the inevitable result of domesticating animals, which, of course, domestication was nothing more than forcing otherwise wild animals out of their habitats and forcing them to live in confinement and as commodities and according to our will, not theirs. So consent's one of the big ones. And of course, consent provides the basis for then humane washing, which is another big fiction that I talk about. And in fact, I kind of devote a whole chapter to humane washing, because I think that that's really an important one for us to be aware of and to be able to address because it's being used as kind of a way to intercept the conversation away from veganism. And it's being used by animal agriculture as a way of kind of saying, hey, you can still have a conscience. You can still eat with a conscience and continue to eat animal products. And here's how we can do it. So that set of fictions says, veganism is just, not necessarily the route that we'd have to go in order to meet our obligations to animals. So, and then, there's many others that we could talk about, but, I've taken photos and video of many different kinds and tried to incorporate as many as I could in the book, but I keep finding new ones all the time.
What is your origin, but not just like what made you become vegan? What really made you become an activist?
I felt that in 2009, when I became more aware of how animals were exploited, that it was at that point it was necessary to do something to give back and to really to become an activist, because I just felt compelled to want to help those victims. And I thought that the way that I could do it was, because I have this background in marketing communications and kind of a behind the scenes understanding of how these fictions are created and presented to the public for consumption, I thought I can use those skills and try to help people see what they're not seeing in their everyday lives, which is, controlling and manipulating their food choices and their beliefs about, consuming animals. So I think, the catalyst was and still is the horrors that we face every day as their advocates, and just being a witness to their suffering, I think, is a constant catalyst for me to keep going.
So given the current political climate we find ourselves in the United States, where so much seems to be, I'll use the term, surrounded by alternative facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was just thinking about that the other day, and I wrote a Facebook post on it, and I just said, vegans have been dealing for years with, conspiracy theories about, what's going to happen if God forbid animal agriculture was to come to an end. What would happen to farmers? What would happen to workers? What would happen to communities and even the environment and animals? So we've been dealing with those kind of conspiracy theories. We've been dealing with alternative facts and with crazy crackpot theories about and justifications for why we have to continue to exploit animals for food. So we're so used to dealing with all this that I think we are actually some of the best prepared people to deal with this so-called post-truth era that Trump has kind of thrown us in. And I think the only, and as I wrote in my Facebook post, I feel, I know this is very broad and general, but I feel like the only way to dig ourselves out of this cesspool is to use the truth to our favor. And maybe there's power in that because, you look at the court, the Washington court decision to halt, at least temporarily, Trump's executive order on the immigration ban. And you think, yeah, well, that was truth to power. That was saying, hey, the Constitution, there's a certain truth here. And the Constitution embodies that. And in this case, anyway. And sorry, but just because you're the president doesn't mean that you're above that truth or that law. So maybe there's a lesson there or some inspiration for us. Maybe we can, try to follow, use that as a lead, so to speak.
It's interesting that you equate with all the crackpot, the crackpot stuff that we deal with all the time as animal rights activists, putting that towards the current political climate. I've never thought about it that way. Because I mean, when you really think about it, the fear of immigration is very similar to the question of, what are you going to do if you find yourself on a desert island? Because it's all bullshit, right?
Right. Yes.
I mean, yeah.
One of the fictions in my book is necessity, and so we could make another analogy. So when it comes to food, there was a recent survey that showed that 66% of Americans still believe that they must consume animals for survival, not even just for, just to survive. So there's a lie being propagated. And then, a similar lie or a parallel lie in the Trump world might be that, we have to protect our citizens from terrorism, but how does that translate into enacting a law that bans people from countries not one of those citizens have ever committed an act of terrorism here? So, I mean, it's a fiction because it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't even begin to address it. And in the same way as this might be kind of like a strange analogy, but your health is not addressed by consume, it's not necessary to consume animals. And it's a proven fact that you could easily make other choices and still get all the nutrients you need. So, these are things that we've been dealing with, I think, for so long that we're like, oh, now the entire world is post-truth. Now all of the other issues that we thought, where there could be some integrity, now we have to challenge all of those in the same manner. It's pretty daunting.
Looking at talking about the current system here in the United States, I think it's more important than ever for animal rights activists to be truly concerned about intersectionality and not being so siloed. So how do you do that, or do you do that? I'd ask.
Yeah, absolutely do. And I just found myself the other day just responding to a Facebook post by a friend that said, I try to focus on animals and not Trump. And my response to something like that is that there's really no separation here. I mean, the victims, those same oppressors, the people, those same systems and organizations and individuals that oppress vulnerable human groups also oppress animals. They're one and the same. So the distinction you're making is a false one, because in fact, we're challenging the whole broad spectrum of oppressions, and we're rejecting all of them for the same reasons. So yeah, that's something that I constantly find myself kind of, having to say, repeat, and it's just yeah. And the other thing is that we speak of animals as something other, when actually, I also have to keep reminding people that we're animals, and that this distinction between advocating for animals and humans is absurd, because we're all animals. So, we really have to get over that kind of Aristotelian, like ancient false dichotomy between us and them.
Well, thank you so much for being on. What are some ways that people can find your book and find out more about you and the projects you're involved in?
Sure. Yeah. So my Twitter handle is Robert_Grillo, and that's kind of like my personal page where I focus on my own work and my book. And then, of course, freefromharm.org is my organization's website. And so that's where people can go for our, see what's going on with the kind of activism we're doing. And the book is it is for sale on Amazon, but for those who don't want to support Amazon or buy it from Amazon, they can go to the publisher's site, which is veganpublishers.com, and find the book there, which is, again, I'll repeat the title, Farm to Fable: The Fictions of Our Animal Consuming Culture.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.